Hello, my name is Baron J. Damon. I'm your certified philanthropic coach. We support individuals and businesses in crafting strategic plans for their charitable giving. Confused about where you want to start? Join me for a complimentary session today to explore your passions and craft a plan for meaningful impact. Let's make a difference together. Go to www.businessoflifecc.com.
Welcome to Questions You Didn't Ask. I'm your host, Niasha Fray. This season is called No Health, No Wealth, Economic Justice and Health Equity. Here's the truth. Health isn't just medical care. It's shaped by income, housing, transportation, and place. If you don't have a job that pays enough, if rent takes half your paycheck, if the nearest grocery store is miles away, you're already on shaky ground. Your health is already on the line. Let me share some facts that underscore why this matters. The median wealth of a Black household was around $44,900 in 2022. Just a fraction of the median white household's $285,000, according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. That's over 6 times less in wealth. Wealth isn't just savings, it's assets minus debts. For Black families, it's often housing and very little else. And where you live, it's an even stronger predictor of how long you live than genetics. In his book, The Death Gap, Dr. David Ansel shows that zip codes in the same city can have life expectations that differ by 20 to 30 years. In Chicago, for example, residents of the affluent Streetville neighborhood live to be around 90 years old, while just a few miles away in Inglewood, life expectancy drops to 60 years. The same pattern shows up across the country, whether we're talking about some town in Texas, Durham, NC, or right here in my hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina, where people in wealthier neighborhoods with good schools, clean air, and easy access to doctors and grocery stores live much longer than people in under-resourced, historically Black and brown communities. This brings us to what's often called the Black tax and the poverty tax. Put simply, these are extra costs people face simply because of their race or because they are poor. The Black tax is the extra cost of being Black. In the United States, it can mean paying more for basic goods and services in Black neighborhoods, facing higher interest rates or insurance premiums, or being shut out of wealth-building opportunities. Writers like Sean Rochester have described it as the financial weight of discrimination on Black Americans, while Andrew W. Carl has documented how unfair tax systems stripped wealth from Black property owners. And it's not just here. Around the world, including in South Africa, the phrase Black tax also describes how Black professionals often support extended families because of long-standing inequalities. Now, the poverty tax describes a similar burden. Poor people often end up paying more just to live. For example, check cashing services charge high fees when families can't access banks. Corner store groceries cost more than supermarkets. Predatory lenders overcharge with sky-high interest. Even traditional banks add to the burden. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in 2022, banks collected $7.7 billion in overdraft and non-sufficient fund fees, fees that are overwhelmingly affect those with low balances. Meanwhile, people who maintain higher balances or have premium accounts enjoy free checking, better interest rates, and other perks. Banks often justify these policies by arguing that such fees cover their operational costs or offset the risk of covering short-term shortages. But as one industry critic put it, well, that would be me, this practice is like trying to squeeze water out of a rock. It assumes the poorest can magically pay for what they can't afford, and it continues to extract from those already struggling. These practices run directly counter to the ideals of health equity and economic justice. Charging more for being poor or for balancing a checkbook poorly doesn't level the playing field, it tilts it further. Being poor shouldn't cost more. It should cost less if we are about helping people improve their current financial situation and future to build a stronger economy and society for everyone. So, when we say health equity, we mean that every person, regardless of race, zip code, or income, has a fair opportunity to live their healthiest life. And economic justice means that ensuring communities have the resources, jobs, capital, infrastructure to make that possible. So I'm honored to be joined by two guests who bring extraordinary insight and real world impact to this conversation. Dr. Keisha Bentley-Edwards, Associate Professor at Duke University School of Medicine, Co-Director of the CTSI Center for Equity and Research, and Associate Director of Research at the Samuel DuBois Cook Center on Social Equity. Her research examines how structural racism, gender, and culture shape health and education outcomes. And her work is supported by NIH and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And second, Farad Ali, a dynamic executive, investor, and board leader with more than 30 years of experience advancing economic mobility and wealth equity. He has led organizations across finance, higher education, and economic development, and his work has directly impacted Black and Latino communities by driving investment, job creation, and leadership development. He also serves on the boards of two nationally acclaimed community development financial institutions, better known as CDFIs. These are specialized organizations that provide capital and financial services to underserved communities. Each institution has over $1 billion in assets and has expanded its geographic footprint and economic impact beyond North Carolina, setting the standard for advancing economic mobility and wealth equity. Together in this conversation, we will dig into why so many full-time workers fall short of basic needs, how economic stress becomes health stress in communities of color, the structural barriers Black entrepreneurs face today, and real-world solutions from equitable investment to community-led economic justice. Let's dive in. So thank you once again for joining me. Today is a special day where we get to discuss this important topic of the intersection between health equity and economic justice. But before we get into it, I always like to start the conversation with a very straightforward question for each of my guests. And Keisha, since I do believe in ladies first, we're going to start with you. Why did you agree to join me in this discussion on questions you didn't ask?
Well, first off, I'm a fan. So I think you're awesome. So you had me at hello. But when it comes to the topic, I think we put ourselves in silos like, okay, my health is here, my finances are somewhere else, and that they're not related unless I have a hospital bill, but not really thinking about all the things that happened before. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about us as whole people, you know. So thank you.
And that's what you do best. And another reason why I'm a fan too, Keisha. But speaking of being fans, Farad, I never ever, shy away from the opportunity to tell you and other people that I'm your fan. But why did you agree to join me in this discussion on questions you didn't ask?
Because you asked. I mean, I don't know how to tell you. I mean, like you said, you asked. I think it's important that we understand that whatever skills that we were given or environments or experiences that we've had as a people, that we look at those as blessings and that we take those in the best way to be better in this world is to give those blessings away. And so when I was honored when you asked, honestly, because to be on this panel was, as you know, I was like, huh? You sure? They smart. I'm a practitioner. Right? No, you'll add a voice that's going to be important, but I do believe that it's important that whatever we have, that we should be lavishly blessing others with whatever we have. And that if knowledge is one of those things, or awareness, and I can be a part of that, I want to, I just want to do it. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much. You know, one of the reasons why I asked that question is because it does help kind of flesh out for our listeners, like, why did these people decide to come together to talk about this question? But also to encourage people, once again, if you haven't heard the theme, you know, just ask, put yourself out there. You never know what might come from just asking the question. And of course, the show is called Questions You Didn't Ask. You know, like my mama used to say, closed mouths don't get fed, right? So we are in the practice of asking our social circle, our network, and so on. Now, to continue the conversation about, you know, how we just need to show up, you know, ask the questions. Don't keep your mouth closed. Let's have the conversation. I'm going to start with you, Keisha. What does health equity mean to you, and how does it show up in your work every day?
Well, look, right now, health equity is one of those dangerous phrases in today's political environment, but it's always been, I wouldn't quite call it dangerous work, but it's always been work that was somewhat risky. And the reason why I bring up the risk of talking about health equity is that if you're talking about making sure that everyone has access to good health, well-being, and good health care, it implies that there are other people who have it and some folks who don't. And oftentimes, the people who have open access don't want to talk about how easy it is to get care and resources and communities you can walk in. So, this is all about the ways that we live our lives so that we can be the healthiest version of ourselves. And so that's really when you talk about health equity, you have to talk about who has access and who doesn't.
And you have built an illustrious career around studying health equity, and not just studying it, but promoting like how it can be done in real life, right? And how it can be done to help improve the lives of others. Of course, we've talked about, you know, your bio and all that other wonderful stuff, but how would you say that it shows up in your work? Like, obviously you focus on this, but what are some of the focuses that you're drilling down on now?
I really think about, my place where I start my conversations about health equity is really with my family. Although I do work with numbers a lot, my motivation came from seeing the people in my life, family members, community members that were dealing with diabetes, foot amputations, cardiovascular disease at a very young age. Infant mortality was really high. Like a lot of babies died in my family when I was a
Mhm.
kid. And I thought that was normal. And so the ways that thinking about health equity shows up for me in my work is I think about, well, what did my family members need so that
Mm.
things could be better? What was missing, especially as I knew more about what was available more broadly? I started realizing where the gaps were in my own communities. And it wasn't all behavioral.
Mhm.
And thinking of, like, what are the systems that are preventing folks from being as healthy as they could be? Because we have to engage with our environment. And so you want folks to walk. Well, do they have a sidewalk? Do they have to walk in the street? Right. So, there's things that I think about on more practical aspects because I think about, well, what would I need to tell my own family members and my community members about being healthier and what they need? And I make sure that when I'm in the room where decisions are made, that I share that information.
I can resonate with that on so many levels. Farad, I'd love to hear, you know, from your perspective, what does health equity mean to you, and how is it showing up in the work that you do every day?
I was fortunate enough to worked with a lady named Dr. Andrea L. Harris for a number of years. And that time was really important to me because I worked at the Institute of Minority Economic Development. And one of the things that we did, we participated in the health smoking cessation study around the impacts on the Black communities and actually minority communities in whole. And we came up with a saying, no health, no wealth.
Mm.
We really believe that good health enables future earning capacity.
Mhm.
When you have good health, you have an opportunity to earn more money. You got a chance to see your investments grow. You get a chance to see some asset accumulation. When you have poor health, it just reduces your ability to work. You heard the doctor talk around increasing medicines in her family, the financial instability, and less generational wealth doesn't allow for you to accumulate and pass on. Again, we can't take any of this with us. But so if your inability to have health is going to be there. And especially when you talk about the difference between acute conditions and chronic conditions,
Mhm.
right? So we have chronic conditions. It actually disrupts our employment. It decreases our productivity. And it takes away from what we can do. So that's a big thing for me for health and wealth. But on the other side, right, that's you look at that from that lens. But if you look at it from the other lens, which is no wealth, no health, right? You start looking around how wealth gives you the access to have, healthier lifestyle. I'm
Mhm.
not saying you apply it, but you do have the ability to have that. It also allows for you to shop and get the groceries and nutrition that you need. It also allows you to be able to go to urgent care or the hospital or the emergency room without worrying about bills. It allows you to someone can tell you, hey, you got the sugar, and then you could take the sugar out your diet. Somebody can go in your refrigerator and throw it away and you won't lose your mind. You'd be like, okay, well then we just gotta go buy different types of groceries. So I think being aware and being able to have wealth gives you the option to have a healthier lifestyle in a better way. So if we're talking about building generational wealth in the community that has not had an opportunity to build wealth because we've been really building building America over these number of years, and that's a whole kind of conversation, then you don't get a chance to participate in wealth. So no health, no wealth, and with wealth, you can have better health.
If you're enjoying the show as much as we love creating it, consider showing your support by buying us a cup of coffee. Visit buymeacoffee.com/Niasha Fray O. That's buymeacoffee.com/Niasha Fray O. All one word. Each cup is just $5, and every single one helps us continue to produce, develop, and sustain the high quality content you've come to expect from Questions You Didn't Ask. Thank you for your continued support, and let's keep the conversation going. That's understandable.
You just made me think about something I used to teach in my classes. And I would talk about even the way we talk about health is cultural, but it's also on that wealth side, right? So if I ask someone, are you healthy? Or how do you know when you're healthy? For someone who, say, as in a white collar job, makes more money, they may say something, oh, like if I can run a 10K, I'm healthy, right? But if you ask someone who is more working class, are you healthy? How do you know when you're healthy? It's when I can go to work, when it's much more functional, my everyday functioning. I can look after my kids or my grandkids. That's a very different perspective. So when you tell people, even to lead a more healthy lifestyle, are you telling them you need to work more? Are you telling them like the ways that we talk about how we use our, is it a matter of how you use your leisure time or how you use your productive time? And then if your wealth is already there, health becomes part of how you use your leisure time.
Yeah. I can definitely understand that. It was interesting. I was just preparing to purchase some groceries, and I was thinking I was going to be able to, make a quick, order online and,
Mm-hmm.
order some groceries and pick them up, from the local grocery store. And when I was thinking about, okay, I need to pack my daughter's, lunchbox, and I know that we need to kind of cut back on carbs, and it would be good to have some like low calorie options. And then I put those like search criteria in, and then did the low to high, sorting
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in terms of prices. Yeah, it was like very blatantly obvious that the most expensive things, right, are the things that are good for you. The least expensive things are the things that have all of the things that that our doctors are usually telling us to avoid, right? The white sugars, just overall sugar, high calories, all that kind of stuff. So it everything that you're saying tracks on so many different levels. So when we think about, I'm just going to throw this out here, especially for you, Farad, what is economic justice and why is it so important right now?
Right now, right? This was before you asked me, it has so many different things. So, economic development, people typically look at economic development in really a transactional way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And where, you do something for me. I was looking in Durham recently, they had a new affordable housing project. And of course, Duke was there, the city of Durham was there. This is not passing disparagement on the work there, but we're so excited to talk about a transaction that happened. And we actually refer to economic development in a very transactional way. And when I started learning around community economic development, which is really different, you actually look at ways to provide a transformational way of economic development, right? So when I'm thinking of economic development, it's not just building the building and having an apartment that's affordable for people to live in. For me, it's like, okay, so where is the bus stop? Where is the grocery store? Where is the drug store for people to get the drugs they may need or the medicines they may need? Where is the labor opportunities for them to go to work and to be on time and to not have an issue because of the weather change? Is there a bus? I remember when I ran for office, they were talking about buses and I kept saying, see, y'all are looking at this the wrong way. You're talking about the city providing buses. I'm like, my problem is the bus stops are horrible. They don't have cover. They don't have benches. They don't have, I'm like, y'all are talking about voting for somebody who's telling you he's going to give you more bus service. I'm like, but I don't want my grandmother out there waiting on the crooked sidewalk. The mess, there's no bench, so people are sitting on the trash can, and there's no covering for the water, the elements of sun or water that may come. And so as you start looking at the possibilities of economic development, I think we need to be looking at it from a healthy standpoint, right? Which deals with how do we support small businesses? How do we invest in housing? How do we recognize transportation access? How do we aim for healthy living and gyms and parks? And so the mindset of economic development sometimes appears like a transaction for a community. And I'm an advocate of don't be transactional, but be transformational and think about ways we can build in ways for people not to just survive, but thrive. And we love to celebrate the survival. Like, we help you survive. I'm like, I don't want you to help me survive. I really want to thrive, right? So give me the things around these things so that I can be perpetually taken care of and not feel like you gave me something, but like, It's like telling somebody how to fish doesn't mean anything if you don't give them pole, the rod, the hook, and the water to fish in.
The
And the
bait.
water better not be poisoned.
And it better not be poison. So we don't think or talk around those issues. We just talk about
Mhm.
So, Farad, you know that you are a person that thinks ahead, and you are a person who listens and you understand and you answer the question so well. But I also want you to talk about, how does community economic development relate to economic justice? What is that? A lot of people don't know. We know. We probably know so good. Sometimes we don't even really think about or examine the definition. But what is economic justice? Like, we talked about health equity, but what in the world is economic justice, especially in the context of what you talked about?
Yeah, so for me, economic justice is around figuring out what's the return on investment, right? How business people look at economic development is like, if I'm going to get some return on my dollar that's monetary, that makes this a good business decision. A community economic development and an economic justice mindset says there will be some financial returns, but there also be some non-financial returns that will build community and provide opportunity. So, for example, I think about like the project at Whitted School where they build, I don't know if you know where Whitted School is, it's right near south side of Durham. Carl Webb and team took an old building that was historic. It helped with integration or during the time back when, and they converted it into a senior living facility so they could have it with someone with dignity. But then they also put in there a nursery. It was like, it did two things, right? It allowed older people to interact with younger people to see older people. It was right near the bus station. And so it provided a tool where people could save money and have some kind of prosperity. So when I think of economic justice, I try to put a model on, if we're going to do an economic project, whatever the economic development project, what's the economic and non-economic variables that improve this community? Makes it more healthier, makes it easier living, makes it all the things that we do for other communities in a way that allows for there to be some equality. A lot of people like to talk about shared prosperity. And I always talk around that's really aspirational unless you understand the systematic barriers of shared prosperity, such as poverty, unemployment, and the historical inequities that were put on our community. And so if you don't have the sense of social mobility and economic mobility, then it's hard to find economic justice in projects or economic development. So it would really be important. And I wish Sandy Darity was here. We were in a panel, I think we were in Baltimore or Florida, and I think I had just left city council. And he said, wouldn't it have been amazing if every economic development project you did or you approved on city council, you could talk around the impact to, we were talking about a project in Northeast Central Durham. If you could talk around the economic impact to those people who are in Northeast Central Durham, to those Black people who live in Northeast Central Durham, to those Hispanic people in Northeast Central Durham, if you do the project or if you don't do the project. And I started thinking about that, like, wow, now wouldn't that be fascinating for them to present not only the economic development project, but to present how this would be positive for the community in the future and to be measured by that. It's a different game, right? And so when you start talking about that, I think we need to look at improvements to our community beyond affordable housing, but look at the culture, the education, the environmental sustainability, and all the other economic successes that can allow for them to have some prosperity from it, not just a building.
Right. Or just being able to pay your bills and get by. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you just paid your bills, you getting by, but there's nothing left over for living,
And that's not even getting by.
Right. So, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about depending on who you ask, how they know they're healthy, that can vary depending on what their economic, situation is. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Keisha. What is economic justice and why is it so important, especially now?
Well, thinking about a lot of what Farad said about the justice, and a big thing right now in health equity spaces and health equity research is cost benefit analysis. That is happening for every little thing, whether it is a government resource, it's any type of service. You've got to be able to say, I'm going to put in 2 cents and then I'm going to save you 50 cents. Like it's always in that type of direction. And there's not as much of, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. We're doing this because it's going to save money. So that transactional side comes into play. But where the economic and justice and the health equity and the health intersect is that once you realize that a lot of the adversity that people deal with, especially if we're going to talk specifically about Black people, which is who I usually talk about, that it's manufactured adversity, right? It's manufactured adversity. So, I like to talk about when I lived in Texas, and to be honest with you, this is the first time I'd lived in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I was fascinated with the grocery stores, that there was a corner where there was a grocery store on at the intersection, every corner, there was a grocery store. There was the regular local grocery store. There was the Head, which is HEB, which is like the Texas grocery store. So there was one that was like the Kroger's. There was a Sprouts, a Whole Foods, and a Trader Joe's. So there were some shopping centers where there were 2 grocery stores in the same shopping center. And in each of those shopping centers, they gave you samples. Like you walked in, and the first I remember, because I had lived in Philly, and I thought I was doing great because I had a ShopRite, and I could get all my groceries in one place. I didn't have to go to 5 different places. And when I got there and I walked in, and they gave me some cheese, some wine, some fruit. They had cut up fruit in a little container that you could just go and test the oranges. And I was like, so not only, and it was cheaper. It was cheaper. That was it, right? And so it wasn't just that you had this abundance of fresh food available on my way home from work. It was higher quality, it was cheaper, and it was just so accessible. And if I tasted something and I was like, "Ooh, this is not good," someone would come out and say, "Oh, well," they would start removing the bags and put something else out there. So it's the different type of that economic justice about who deserves health that we don't always talk about. And that is also part of the economic justice, because a lot of times you have these big stores that say it's not a good return on investment to move into a neighborhood that's predominantly Black or that's working class or facing higher levels of poverty. They don't even give them a chance. And usually if you see, like, I already know that if a Whole Foods pops up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, it's about to flip. I mean, we can see that we saw that in Harlem, right?
The
So
first sign is the Starbucks. That's usually the
the
first sign.
Starbucks.
By the time you make it to
Yeah,
Whole Foods, you gone. It's gone.
yeah. We
But
look when
go
I lived
ahead.
in New York and they built that Disney store. I was like, oh, oh,
Yes. We thought we was doing something with Magic Johnson's movie theater when it showed up. And
yes,
then, so
yes,
we was like feeling like we were saved.
yes, yes. And
And
see, and
then other
Magic Johnson
stuff.
owned that Starbucks. Magic Johnson owned that Starbucks, but
Mm,
it ushered in a whole new era. It wasn't really meant for
mhm,
us. So, it's a matter of, you know, that economic justice of it's one thing to tell people to eat healthy, but if you have to eat either out from the little mini marts at gas stations or at drugstores,
Family
corner
Dollar.
stores, Family Dollar, Dollar General, it's a very different, that's where you get the high salt, high carb food, and that's where you get the cheaper food.
Mhm.
Trying to get the fresh groceries, it gets a lot more difficult. And if we were to talk about the thing that like people get a bad rap on, and this is something that I appreciate working with Sandy Darity on, is the myths that Black people don't know how to manage money,
Mm.
right? And especially if you get my friends who are single mothers who have to take care of kids and sometimes a parent,
Mm.
best money managers ever. You want to talk about going to the grocery store? The only problem is that they have to get a lot of canned food. They get foods that last a long time. And my girl Kelly, I was always impressed with her because at 27 years old, she went and bought an old lady freezer so that she could
That's right. Better get your chest freezer.
buy meat. Yeah, and got her so she could buy meat and put it into the when it was on sale, and
Mhm.
she could buy in bulk,
Mhm.
when possible, for leaner times.
Mhm.
And I just we don't get the credit, and a lot of Sandy's work proves the point, that we do know how to manage money, we just don't have a lot of it. So there's always room for growth, but to expect financial literacy to solve all the problems when there's no finances, we got to have some money, and then like you can give me some, like, hey, for when you get money we can do some lessons. But that all comes into play as far as our health, because how many jobs are we having do our jobs? Because our health insurance is tied to employment. If you have inconsistent employment, or as there is more and more of a push of the gig economy, I know for folks who are in their 20s, doing things like Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, it's appealing because you can make your own hours. You're getting your money quickly, but there's nothing for the long term, right? There's no health insurance. There's no savings. There's no extension of a retirement benefit. You're not
Mhm.
you're not buying a house from that, especially
Mhm.
if the side gig economy is your primary income. Those are all issues that will affect your health and
Mhm.
the way that you can care for yourself, because you got to do more and more. You end up working more hours in the gig economy than you would at a traditional job, but you don't have the flexibility that you may need so that you can pick up your kids. So those are some of the ways that you can see some of the economic intersections. On the other side of economic justice, we know that, in the Black community, we tend to do more with less in general. But if we were to talk about folks who have a higher level of education, you see bigger disparities between, say, middle class, upper, highly educated Black people and white people on a lot of the key health indicators. So, infant mortality, maternal mortality, heart disease, all those different things that are preventable diseases, where wealth is that great predictor. You have more wealth, or you've got more higher income, higher education, if you're white or if you're part of the general population, then the more wealth, the increase of your positive health indicators, decrease of the negative health indicators. For African Americans, you might see a little increase depending on what it is, but oftentimes it's not significant, or
Mm-hmm.
the drop in poor health outcomes is so drastic for white populations that for that the little improvement you get for African Americans when you have more education, you have a higher income, it makes a bigger gap.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends up being a situation where we're not all the same. So what'll happen is if we were to think specifically about maternal health, so folks who are pregnant, a black person who has a college degree and they're pregnant, they go in a doctor's office and they say, oh, well, hello, Dr. Keisha. I see you're
Do they say
married.
Dr. Keisha? They don't say Dr. Keisha. They
They
just
don't.
say Keisha.
But I'm just trying to say,
That's
I'm
a
just
part of
trying
the
to
issue, though,
say,
is that when you go to the doctor, they don't know what your economic status is. They don't know what your
they don't.
financial
Well, they don't.
situation is. They
Exactly.
just see a
They
brown face. They see a
and
black
you
woman.
yeah, and I'm okay with being treated like my brothers and sisters in arms. Like I am
Yeah.
perfectly fine with that. And I gotta tell you, things got to be real bad for me to have to drop a Dr. Bentley in there. So you have this thing where no matter where you're at, folks will treat you some kind of way that is not a good way
Mm-hmm.
in that health encounter. And then, even if they do know that you are married and that you got your PhD, MD, JD, MSW, because we like to collect degrees,
Oh, yeah.
and they assume that you're going to have the same outcomes as white folks that are similarly
Right.
situated. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not even aware of, a lot of the healthcare providers are not aware of the larger issues where it's like, well, my provider and I have this great relationship, but when I go into the hospital, these people don't know me. If you're lucky and you have a great relationship with your doctor, you go in the hospital, you're just like everybody else anyway, right? And so, and you get treated like everybody else. And these are the things that happen, and it's not good. It's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just because you make more money as a Black person doesn't mean that you are protected from racism. You may be able to rebound better from racism, meaning that you can choose to go to another provider. You can choose to take your business elsewhere in ways that can improve your health. You
Mm-hmm.
know how to file a formal complaint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Maybe. And that's a big maybe. But it doesn't mean that those slights and discrimination don't impact your health.
Most definitely.
So just because you can bounce from it doesn't mean that you're fully recovering
Mm-hmm.
from it. And that's not talked about enough as far as economic justice. The dollar does not go as far. It doesn't give you the same social capital. Still, go get your education, go make that money, but understand the limitations. You'll get more out of it than if you didn't.
Yeah.
But just understand that it will not solve all of Black people's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Keisha, I just want to parlay. I didn't want to interrupt the earlier part of, I remember I'm speaking Dr. Andrea Harris's language, so I want to be nailed to this. She used to say there's a Black tax to being poor.
Absolutely.
And I was like, what do you mean there's a Black tax? I've never heard of Black tax. I've heard of federal tax, state tax. I said, what's tax? She said, let's go through this. If you live in a poor community, then you have to pay more for grocery because, the grocery store may be the bodega, the local grocery store. So milk may be a certain price at a large retailer in a prominent community. I'm trying to leave everybody's names out, but y'all know what I'm talking around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Be $2.39, and with your card, you can get it for $2.20. But if you go get it from the store, you can't even get a gallon. You got to get a half a gallon and pay $4.
There you
Yep.
go.
The impact to the dollar, the percentage impact of the dollar for a community that doesn't make as much money is real. And then you got to think about the impact to what they have to do that they add costs because of insurance and having to put a gate up and having to have cameras. They price all that in that work. So
Absolutely.
you end up paying more to be in that community. So it's so important when you're talking around building communities and understanding the health impacts. And we're not even talking about the mental health impacts.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about all this physical stuff, but the
Mhm.
mental impact of having to live in that environment could
Mhm.
create an outcome that is not good.
Absolutely. That surveillance,
Mm.
right? So it's the combination of you personally having to be hyper vigilant so that you're not taken advantage of in a lot of different ways. You're not being harassed by the police. Your kids aren't being harassed by the police. Your partners aren't being harassed. Um, and then knowing that you are always being watched, and if you might be able to get away with this but not for long, or even if you do all the right things, that it can turn. So that hyper vigilance, the safety nets, and the freedom to make mistakes, especially if you're in an environment, and if you live in an area that has higher crime rates, violent crime rates, and who's getting the benefit of the doubt.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to me.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely exhausting.
Yeah,
So what
and we
are
know this is true when it comes to stop and frisk, right? So we know, just going home from work and knowing that the police are going to pull you over, whether you're walking, going to the bus stop, standing in the mud, you could still get pulled over or held. And then it's these inconveniences that are not just a minor inconvenience. They
Mhm.
they are an assault on your mental health. And so, yes, as Black people, we are resilient, but imagine the innovation that Black people would have if we didn't have to deal with all this manufactured adversity.
Thanks for joining me for episode 1 of No Health, No Wealth, Economic Justice and Health Equity. I'm Niasha Fray. Join us for episode 2 as we continue the conversation with Dr. Keisha Bentley-Edwards and Farad Ali. Until then, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and stay connected with me on LinkedIn, YouTube, Blue Sky, or Substack.